how one COP can throw balls to the other COP. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, Anna, you give me the go, right?
The technician will.
Okay.
I hope. I think we can start, Alexander.
All right.
We are on.
Right. I see. I'm not sure I am on. I see Alexander's name is displayed for the audience.
But I got a message that they can see us.
All right. Well, let's go. So hi, everybody. Good time of the day, wherever you are watching us from. Welcome to this session 1.2 of this afternoon. We will be talking today on how to lighten the load, and so how to remove environmental pressure, different types of environmental pressures, to set global biodiversity on a path to recovery in Kunming at COP15 that is still scheduled for October this year. I am Alexander Rankovic. I'm a researcher at IDRI, based in Paris, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations. And I will be the happy moderator of this session. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Florica Fink-Hoosier, the DG Environment, for a few introductory remarks. Florica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander, and good afternoon, everybody, to this indeed very first session, just after the opening of our GreenWeek on zero pollution and for healthier people and a healthier planet. Now, this session on lightening the load is very clear. I think the nature is in crisis. We all know that. I can be brief on that, but I just wanted or were asked to set a little bit the scene. Science is also very clear. Pollution is one of the 5 main drivers for biodiversity loss. And pollution is certainly one about it, but it is not the only and an independent cause. We have to make sure that we understand that we contributed with all activities, what we are doing, because it's our pattern of consumption, of production, but also it's human population dynamics. It's the way we trade globally. But we all do know that pollution causes harm in very different ways. And of course, in the EU, we have just adopted our Zero Pollution Action Plan, because we do know that pollution leads to can lead to severe mental or physical diseases, premature deaths, and often it's always the most vulnerable that are affected the most. if we don't have a good health, we also don't have a good healthy environment. And without a healthy environment, this environment is not allowing to produce the services that we need, for instance, as being an ecosystem that can help to sequester carbon or help in decontamination. So in the EU, we wanted to lead the fight against global fight against pollution, but we can't do this alone. And therefore, while we were saying in our Zero Pollution Action Plan, there is several targets to look at, and we pointed out pollution as a one very important one. We actually want to look at Kunming, because we want to drive this ambition for a healthier planet, a healthier environment at Kunming, which is the Biodiversity Summit. And this Biodiversity Summit is our unique chance to really make progress and go for dedicated targets on reducing pollution from all sources. And whatever it is, it can be plastics, can be biocides, whatever you want, but we need to act. Now, the issue is that today, the science is clear, perhaps the morality is there as well to act, but process is not so clear. And there is a lot to be done. And it starts by something very simple. Are we, among the parties to this biodiversity and the biodiversity agreement, are we agreeing even on the numeric values? Are we agreeing on the terminology? Not necessarily. There are endless discussions on baselines, headline indicators, and there's also a discussion on the process. But here at the EU, we are relatively clear what we want to get out of it. We have a biodiversity strategy. We set very clearly the objectives for us, but we do realize we can only do this if we act with others together at a global level. So this is where our panel comes in, because we hope that from the participants, from the panelists, who will be sharing their views, that we get ideas how to do it better and also how to rally the others around. And with that scene setting, I would like to pass on now back to the moderator, to Alexander. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Florica. Thank you very much for setting the scene, both, I would say, on the substance and the political challenges that we have in front of us. I would say, I was going to say this year, but this year is a start, this year and the coming years. So to deepen a bit the conversation and on these different points, we have the chance today to have two panelists with us. We have Carlos Martin Novella, who's the Deputy Executive Secretary of the BRS conventions, the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm conventions. And Mark Sutton, who's an environmental physicist at the Center for Ecology and Hydrology in the UK. On my side, I would just like to say a few words before I launch the first round of questions to our panelists. Just wanted to say that whatever the ambition of the targets that we are adopted in Kunming at COP15, it will be extremely important for their implementation, that the actors that are experts both in science and policy of biodiversity, the parties, the negotiators from that are specialists specialized in the CBD, that there are more interactions, more synergies with the sectors, the arenas, the conversations, the institutions, the processes that are dealing with the drivers of biodiversity loss. So these are arenas where the drivers are being governed and where different types of transitions that are needed are being discussed and negotiated. And there's really a need to build stronger bridges between these different actors, to be stronger together, to indeed move in the direction that we need if we want to indeed curb the loss of biodiversity. And I'd like really to congratulate the organizers of the session for choosing this very, I would say, relevant title. The discussion that we want to have here is how to really use all of these other processes to lighten the load that we collectively are putting on biodiversity worldwide. And so this poses a lot of governance also issues on how we can imagine to make these different international conventions, instruments work together, both at the international level and then to see how this can be translated in action on the ground. And so we're very lucky to have Carlos with us because he is working with one of those cluster of conventions that are dealing with the different types of pressures that are pressures on biodiversity, so different types of pollutions, of chemical substances and waste. And also we're very lucky to have Mark with us, who can also connect that with the scientific understanding, I would say, of what is needed on the ground if we are to really alleviate a little bit the pressure that we're putting on biodiversity. And so that being said, I would like to ask our panelists a first question, and the first question would be, what do you think the ambition for pollution reduction could or should be in the post-2020 global biodiversity framework? What do you think would be, either in terms of numerical value or language or types of substances, where we could imagine having a progress on in the coming years, because they are critical, but also because maybe when trying to bridge different processes together, there are opportunities to increase the synergies. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Carlos, I would start with you, if you agree.
Fine. Thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you very much, Florica, and by extension, the European Commission, for organizing this meeting, extremely timely on the time and on the subject, as has been said. I will focus on what we are doing in the VRS conventions. For those who are not familiar, we are dealing with waste, with international trade of chemicals, and with persistent organic pollutants that are particularly nasty types of chemicals. And as a difference to the CBD, at least the POPs convention, the Stockholm Convention, is not a framework convention, it's very executive. So at the proposal of member states, we analyze, scientific body of the convention analyze the impacts of chemicals on human health and the environment. And when I mean environment, I mean flora, fauna, and ecosystems, that for others is called biodiversity. And on the basis of this analysis, the COP decides to regulate the use or including the elimination of the production and use of chemicals. So it's very executive convention. We have an example, the DDT, coming to talk about chemicals. That was, by the way, the inspiring the book of the Share in the Spring some decades ago. And the DDT was listed under the POPs Convention. Was one exception given to some countries who need to continue using this for combating malaria, until some alternatives are used. And so far is only one factory that I'm confident is about to close in the world, who is producing DDT, and it's a handful of countries who are still using this. But in the light of the alternatives coming up, the DDT may come out of the market and to be all the file stocks hopefully destroyed in the very close future. So we should aim at doing that with all the different chemicals, phytosanitary chemicals or industrial chemicals that are causing problems to biodiversity and human health. Simply identify them, analyze them, listing them on the Stockholm Convention, and eliminate them from the market and from the surface of this world. It's very simple. So we, talking about ambition, this was the introduction, ambition. We have a strategic plan in the convention, also running for 10 years. We'll make the evaluation subject to the conference of the parties next year. And I would not imagine the level of ambition of the CBD regarding chemicals and waste to be lower level than the level of ambition that we have in the VRS. Simply could be impossible to imagine. Not only will be a disaster for the CBD, will be a disaster for the VRS as well. So having said that, I'm surprised to see the lack of experts working in our global monitoring program, participating in the discussions on the CBD. Something is failing there. So as I said, the level of ambition as high as possible, please. And we will, as we are proving that we can, one by one, taking rid of the most nasty chemicals. And if we have a bit of help from the parties, we will step up these efforts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Right before I pass the mic to Mark, I would just like to remind our audience that you can still join the Slido space to ask questions to the speaker. The QR code and link, the link code to join the space is visible to the audience in your virtual room screen. So please don't hesitate. After a round of answers from our speakers, we will actually continuously we will be monitoring this space and try and pass as many of your questions as possible to our panelists. So please do not hesitate to use that space for interaction. So that being said, Mark, the floor is yours. What do you think of my question? And if you want to react, of course, to what Carlos has said, please don't hesitate.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alexander. And thank you all of you for this opportunity to join the call as part of EU GreenWeek. I really appreciated Florica's comments, which she rolled in the word moral requirement or moral position. And if you look at these effects of substances on the environment, pollution, how much do we want? None at all. And surely that is the basis of the Zero Pollution Action Plan. We don't accept pollution at all. So let's put that on one side. And then, of course, we go to the other side and we hit practicality. And I'm sure many people have sat in intergovernmental processes and saw how slow the countries sometimes move and grind to a halt. And often what we see is countries looking for excuses not to take action. So if we're going to marry these two together, to me, the starting point is you've got to want to change. The countries have got to know this is in our own interest to change. That has to be the starting point. Now, my particular experience started in air pollution. I can tell you lots about transboundary air pollution. And in the last years, I've been working on nitrogen pollution. And nitrogen, you've not heard of that. Perhaps everybody's heard of carbon. Nitrogen is in air pollution, water pollution, climate change is everywhere. We say nitrogen is everywhere and invisible, the thing that everybody forgot. Now, why do I work on nitrogen? I work on nitrogen because of the barriers to change for air pollution. We were struggling to make progress with ammonia air pollution alone, so little progress. And finally, we found out if countries want to change, we've got to club together all the reasons. That's where Carlos came in, already clustering conventions, the BRS conventions clubbing together. And that's our nitrogen challenge as well, how to cluster and club together. So we're working with the United Nations Environment Programme. There was a resolution agreed in the last Environment Assembly, resolution on sustainable nitrogen management. It's setting in place the basis for an inter-convention nitrogen coordination mechanism. So the countries agreed that. What the countries didn't agree was how far to go. And of course, that's a slower process. In the interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism, as developing, we have the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Convention on Air Pollution, the Framework Convention on Climate Change being represented. We don't yet have the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm. How widely should we cluster? That I think is a really good idea. When do we focus? When do we join? That's the detail for us to work out. The second step was then how far to go. And that we went with something called the Colombo Declaration. We took a leading group of countries under the leadership of the president of Sri Lanka, and out of the Colombo Declaration came an agreement that if you want to move forward, you need national focal points, national action plans, a civil service working on your challenge, and secondly, a goal. And the goal we came up with was halve nitrogen waste from all sources by 2030. So we're really excited to see that in the EU plans, you've reinvented that to a 50% reduction of nutrient losses. Don't worry about the naming, but it's amounting to pretty much a similar ambition. And of course, it's the pragmatic, it's bold, it's saying, let's really push for action, recognizing that zero pollution is going to take us some time in the future. And how to get there, my view would be, if we really want to move forward, we've got to have the win-wins. And on the nitrogen front, it means halving nitrogen waste saves you $100 billion a year of resource. Great for the circular economy. Cleaner air pollution, cleaner water pollution, contribution to net zero, health, etc., etc. And of course, with biodiversity at the heart of that, pushing for biodiversity, but multiple benefits, our argument is that's the kind of thing that's going to want countries to want to change.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of us. Thank you, Mark, for reminding us of the other major disrupted biogeochemical cycle, which besides carbon is of course nitrogen. Florica, would you like to provide some comments or remarks, or do you want to keep that for later? We think we will then go ahead. Anne, can I ask you if you...
I lost you in between. This is why I didn't know. I heard Florica and then it was blank.
All right, sorry. I thought
I stopped because they had a blank here.
No problem. I thought it was a silence of disagreement.
No. I had a real disruption here.
No worries.
I'm happy that I'm back online.
I was just asking you whether you wanted to react on the first round of answers from Carlos and Mark, or if you wanted to jump in back later on in the conversation.
I think I prefer later, because we really have to hear from the colleagues and the experts, and I already took notes some of their ideas.
No worries. Thank you. So Anna, I wanted to ask you if there were any questions in the Slido space yet?
Not yet.
Not yet? Great.
So the floor is yours, Alexander.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, Carlos, you mentioned at the end of your reply whether, you mentioned a worrying fact. You said that the experts, the monitoring experts that you have at the BRS, that you had a feeling, or that was your observation, that they were not sufficiently involved in the post-2020 biodiversity discussions. And I wanted to ask you, not maybe to try and explain why you think is the case, but what could we do in the coming months if you think there is something that is still possible there to mobilize this expertise to indeed feed the discussion on ambition on pollution?
Well, for a secretariat, it's very difficult to give instructions to member states, but I can make some suggestions. In our website, they can find the membership of the different panels that we have on the global monitoring program for each one of the regions. There are names and there are well-known scientists of different countries. So if they want to know a bit more about how our global program on monitoring of chemicals and POPs operates and what are our targets and so on, simply ask them. Or just check our website. All the reports are there. If I can give you some examples of the last report. If I can put some slides I have, maybe the technician can help me. It's loading, I hope now.
Yes. Yes, no.
It's coming up, so I go to this one. So if you can see in this slide on the left, is interesting because you see in the first group of POPs that were adopted, and the second group of POPs that were adopted on the slide on the figure on the left. That shows that it's a time lag. So member states are taking action, but from the moment when they are listing the POPs until the time when they are putting national legislation in place, it takes years. So it's something to have in mind. So when we develop a framework. So this is a procedural indicator. We know how many countries are putting measures in place to execute the decisions of the confederal parties. Then in the figure on the right, you see another indicator. So it's looking into the details. What kind of chemicals are being addressed? So if we see on the two left columns, we see that in pesticides, most of those countries that are still using listed pesticides are still dealing with DDT. This is just, as I said, a handful African countries and one single factory in the world, and the alternatives are now in place, so I'm confident the DDT problem will disappear soon. On the right, there is the industrial chemicals indicator, and countries who are still using chemicals are basically using PCBs. Is one single chemical that is still there, and it seems that it's not interesting enough for some countries to take rid of the stockpiles. But this is something that would be relatively easy, and it's an indicator of procedure. Now, when we go into the indicators of ecosystems and substantive indicators, here you have see on the left side the sampling stations we have for monitoring passively air or actively air or soils or human blood or human milk. And with this information that we are compiling in a number of countries around the world, you can see on the right all the different sampling stations that are available. This is data that is running out for decades now, and so it's nothing that is new. You can see that we are able to see what happens in the left. You see what happens with DDT in one locality in Japan. So with time, it's going down slowly. When you can see in the right side is for dioxins and for DDT, how these are going down in different regions in the world, starting with different baselines and how things are evolving. So this is very promising. I can show you also for some other chemicals, and figures are not as promising. And then you can analyze why this is not so promising. So what I want to say is that indicators are there. These indicators are there. So I fail to understand why colleagues in the CBD, nobody is showing this slide to them. Why this is not an indicator. It's we have 30 POPs. So I can show you 30 graphics like that with a series of almost 20 years. I don't know. And this is these chemicals are listed because they're cancerogenic or mutagenic or endocrine disruptors to biodiversity. For me, it's straightforward. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for, I would say passing the ball to people involved in the CBD, but also showing at the same time the wealth of material that is there. So it's not just a rhetorical question. You're also providing the material that they can tap in. I had a question for Mark, but I think I will keep it for after the more general question that I am now about to ask you, because it helps make a direct follow-up with the conversation we just had now with Carlos. As I said in the introduction, it was also mentioned by Florica in her setting the scene. How do you think we could help and ensure, and Mark, you've also discussed, I mean, you provided a very useful example on the interconvention nitrogen coordination, so it's also a direct follow-up to the point you raised. But then now moving forward, how do you think that we can ensure synergies and cooperation, and I would say even stronger synergies and cooperation with other conventions, so between the CBD and I would say the biodiversity related convention more generally, with the other conventions, the international organizations, initiatives, maybe even the SDG process, the HLPF discussion taking place where the synergies between SDGs are also a point of discussion. What do you think that we could do differently now and for the next decade to try and strengthen this level of cooperation that we have seen some progress on, but as I think this conversation is showing, there is so much more to do. So what would be some of your practical insights on what we could do to help these instruments better work and be stronger together?
Yeah, so thanks so much, Alexander. I think you're really getting to the nub of it here. And Carlos' example was actually rather nice in that, illustrating a connection with the data sets, but relevant for both the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm conventions and the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then the question is, as you put it, Carlos, why are we not seeing more of this kind of data in the CBD convention? And I think that is a microcosm of the challenge faced perhaps by the CBD. And I'll look in my work on nitrogen and nutrients and air pollution and say, well, hey, where are they fitting as well? And in that world, we have something called the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution. It's a very convention. It's full of data sets. The main pollutants are sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, ammonia, particulate matter, tropospheric ozone. They have a big discussion about dealing with methane or not dealing with methane. Now that convention's got years and years worth of data, but it faces barriers. And the number one barrier it faces, it's not a global convention. Now, the parties have not wished to widen because they've been afraid that if they do formally widen, the convention would make less progress. But on the other hand, they have recently established, in the process of establishing, a global forum for transboundary air pollution, looking to broker major partnerships, share skills on data sets, emission inventories, that kind of detail that Carlos was illustrating. So let's imagine that partnership, because to me, the reality is that the CBD, as a convention on biological diversity, also faces a biological diversity of issues. You know, the number of indicators and issues in the CBD is quite scary. It means that when you zoom into one indicator, there isn't the space to have that level of detail that you, Carlos, would like for toxic chemicals, and I would like for nitrogen and air pollution and other things. I think that means that we have to work in partnership between the conventions. It's not about duplication, it's about complementarity. Complementarity about bringing the links together and the detail. And that's exactly then what we're doing in this interconvention nitrogen coordination mechanism. We've got CBD on board. We've got the Secretariat of the Climate Convention on board, but we need much more and much stronger links if we're really to be serious. And then the question is, we don't want duplication. So each convention should work out where the lead is on the goal and on the monitoring of the evidence, but then the sharing with that, with the other conventions, so that it's clear that the information is there, and of course, those win-wins for taking action. So I have to say, on the nitrogen front, many people have said in the past, we want a nitrogen convention, and every policymaker I ever met, no, thank you, we've got enough conventions. But we don't have enough coordination. And that coordination is the area for the next 5-10 years. I think we have to be pressing strongly on if we're going to get the multiple win-wins.
Yeah, if I may jump on this, I think, Mark, really you hit the nail there. It's really important. We have a long story to collaborate with the UNEC Convention. In fact, the experts for the European region, most of them are sitting down in the both committees and they are sharing information. So this works very well. Now, the challenge is at global level with other conventions, how we exercise this collaboration at secretariat level, at expertise level, at member states level. And that is very difficult with as broad as biodiversity is and as broad as chemicals and waste is, to have one single focal point that knows about everything and controls everything and digests everything and sprays everything is simply impossible. So maybe it's time to think in the same way that it was done with the sustainable development goals. So you have one level that is the headline indicators, quite general, quite general, but then you have a process when you somehow delegate or you empower those who are more specialized to elaborate the details, to beef up all this in the second layer or third layer or fourth layer, and then to have a mechanism of reporting back. This is how the sustainable development goals has been developed, operating, and I think in the topic we are talking is a good example that should follow. I cannot imagine to have indicators completely different for one convention, another convention on topics of common interest. There has to be some convergence there. And at the same time, I said the landscape is so broad that if it's not a proper architecture established, it will be very difficult to manage.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And Mark, Carlos, while I have you, there's one thing we haven't defined. Could you please just define quickly what POPs are, because all of the audience is not an expert on, and It sounds like a fancy acronym, but actually the harsh reality behind it. So.
Is persistent organic pollutants are, as I said, the most nasty of the pollutants. So they are pollutants that are transported through long distances by water, by air, traditionally by even feathers of birds, and more recently we have a proposal being now assessed by our committee of experts, transport by waste plastic. So some POPs are inherent structure of plastics that provide the plastics some peculiarities, some functionalities that otherwise the plastic will not be able to be used. But when this plastic becomes waste and goes into the water, the POP starts going out, and they start going out in the waters of the ocean in the part of the world. So this is pollutants that are persistent, so that means that they last for long time, long time, that they are very bad. They cause cancer, they cause mutations, they cause endocrine disruptions, and that they are organic. Yeah? So it's not all the pollutants, but it's quite an important part of the pollutants we should look at. When we look at the Rotterdam Convention, the scope is broader, and of course in Basel Convention waste is much broader. But in the POPs, it's very target. We started 20 years ago with 12 POPs. Now we're in 30. We were one by one. In the last COP, we make a change, and instead of one by one, it was the PFOA approved. That is not one chemical, it's a family of chemicals, 4,000 in one go. So 4,000 chemicals in one go. Now, this is very, very encouraging. Now, you want to see the dark side of the coin. There are estimations that there is about 400 POPs still to be addressed. So that's why I said we need to accelerate, and we need to raise the level of ambition.
Thank you, Carlos, both for the definition and linking the definition with the need to raise ambition. Thank you so much. I had one question for you, Mark, to follow up on what you said. You very eloquently advocated at the end of your reply that we need much stronger links and more connection. And could you maybe try and venture what, maybe in very practical terms, what stronger links could be in practice in your view, and where do we need these connections? Is it in the goals or the monitoring frameworks between the teams, or all of that? But if you could try and illustrate some, in practice in terms of the day-to-day work also of the different communities, what it would mean, I think it would be useful to the audience.
And I think firstly, it is the communities of people linking. So you think, how many hours are there in my day? Can I possibly be involved in 2 intergovernmental processes, let alone governmental processes? Because you just run out of hours in the day. So you need marketplaces where people who do spend time in those conventions are coming together, talking and sharing. And that's what we see already in the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm conventions, 3 coming together, are working closely together. So I think that is really concrete. In our case, in the nitrogen world, we've got these, the Air Convention, the CBD, Biodiversity, Climate Convention, working together. UNEP is hosting, and we're working with something called the International Nitrogen Management System to bring everybody together. In the process of doing that, we find out that we need new indicators, that the old indicators aren't sufficient anymore. We're not stopping the old indicators. Now, let's give me an example. Total emissions to atmosphere is the kind of thing that's right in there in the European Union National Emissions Ceilings Directive. It's out there protecting human health, protecting biodiversity. Those are great indicators. And you can have other regional indicators as well. I'll give you another one, which is think about the Natura 2000 area of Europe, and you've got the percentage area protected, but not just the percentage area, the percentage number of sites. Both of those are important, because the big area is in the remote clean locations, and the small damaged sites are in the high pollution intensity areas. You have to have both indicators, area and number of sites. So that's an illustration with biodiversity. But how do we link that with the air pollution and emissions and water pollution? And that's where we came with this framing of nitrogen waste. The nitrogen waste, and I don't mean solid waste here or chemical waste, I mean wasted resource. Because that nitrogen is a resource worth $200 billion a year in the world. And it changes our agenda because suddenly we realize that even if you take nitrogen and make ammonia, that's pollution. Nitrate is pollution. Particulate matter, PM2.5, is pollution. But dinitrogen, that's the stuff we breathe. 78% of the sky is nitrogen. I'm looking at the blue sky. The nitrogen molecules make the sky blue. But if you, in the soil, convert nitrogen resources back to dinitrogen, it's called denitrification. It's a massive waste of resources. So it's not pollution, but it is waste. And if we want to transform to a circular economy, we've got to reduce all of those waste. The net result is total nitrogen losses, including dinitrogen. We've reinvented our indicator to meet our new needs as the communities come together. And of course, then we get goals. So I think there is going to be a need to continue our long-term old indicators like national emissions, etc. There's going to be a need for new indicators the community thinks around them. And the last thing I'd say is, yes, we must cluster, but we must also be sensible about when and how we cluster at what time. And I want to illustrate that by the example of phosphorus. So we work with the United Nations Environment Programme, and we often talk about both nitrogen and phosphorus, and people say we should talk about nutrients instead. And that's fine, and logically it has a lot. But on the other hand, there are different issues. With nitrogen, it's air, land, water, everywhere. With phosphorus, it's water pollution and it's resource depletion. And that resource depletion issue, particularly when it comes to phosphate resources in West Africa or wherever, becomes highly political sensitive. And that high level of political sensitivity means you bog down your process so that you may make very little action. So then you say to yourself, when should we be having these issues together? When now, when later? And I think the answer to that is we must be pragmatic about our clusters. Yes, there is a logical science of clustering, but we must also be pragmatic about at what time are we going to really make progress. And the phosphorus one, let's not forget phosphorus, of course, but we don't want to grind to a halt our nitrogen process with that where it's just so sensitive. And there may be many other issues like that.
Thank you so much, Mark. We have the level of people, communities of work, and more technical level on the level of indicators and data, but then also a very, I would say, political and strategic thinking of sometimes the relevance, and that not all convergence sometimes is the most fruitful way to make progress. I see Anne have a question.
Indeed.
No, yes, please.
Thank you very much. We heard very much Carlos and Mark complaining about the lack of involvement of pollution experts in the CBD context, but we can also turn the same issue and say that, you know, there is a lack of biodiversity experts in the pollution community. And for years, the focus of pollution has been on human health, which is right. But I think we need to connect the dots as well, especially, you know, if we want, as Florica said, everybody to be engaged, then that means that we should all be consistent and tell the full story, which is pollution is maybe bad for human health, but for environment health, which in turn has some impact also, you know, on human health, but also on the services that nature provides and on which our socio-economic development is based. So, I mean, unless we take the full cycle and we look at it in a very systemic way, we will fail. And so that means everybody has to work together and act together and do things at each level. So I think this is also a duty we all have. Do you agree, Mark?
Yes, I very much support that, and I think it is critical. In the air pollution world, it's been clear that 99% of the political driver has been air pollution and human health. And indeed, yes, as you say, quite fine. But it means that far too little attention has been given to how ecosystems are suffering because of air pollution. I see action happening here, particularly the Netherlands has its nitrogen crisis. And you can ask, why does the Netherlands have a nitrogen crisis with the Prime Minister involved, etc.? Because of the clash between the Habitats Directive, the nature requirement to protect, and on the other hand, all these farming activities, transport emissions from roads going up, and the two are not compatible. And suddenly, the legal position in the EU comes together and says, no, you can't have more development. The Habitats Directive says you've got to set some limits. But what is really interesting is that many of the people don't fully understand that. I was actually in the region, it was in Germany, and a whole load of tractors drive past me. The tractors are demonstrating, and I tried to find out why they're demonstrating. They don't know why they're demonstrating, but they were demonstrating out of sympathy for the Dutch farmers. Now, I've a lot of sympathy for everybody, but the point was they didn't really know why they were demonstrating. And I think this is back where, again, when nature gets forgotten, what is the reason for nature to protect? And therefore, we're going to have to be a lot clearer about why we need to protect nature. And I'll give one quick example about this, which is Northern Ireland peat bogs. So Ireland, the Emerald Isle, is famous for its peatlands. They're beautiful places to go and visit, and they're full of biodiversity. But one of the things they're also doing is storing carbon. And so therefore you've got this direct link. The pollution of those bogs is leading to degradation, meaning they won't be storing carbon so well. And there you've got this massive ecosystem service that links directly to climate policy. And those kind of stories we need to tell again and again if really nature's going to get a look in and people start to care about it.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, when we come to pollution, humans and biodiversity are in the same boat. To give you one example, we have some pollutants, PCBs, that are being monitored with milk samples, human milk, and blood samples in the Arctic with the human populations there. But these guys don't get these pollutants in their blood and their milk because the factories to be nearby. They take it because what they are eating, it is the fish. So we know that there's some one-off or two-off studies of PCB concentrations in orcas and killer whales, in many other species. But when it comes to develop a monitoring program, probably it's easier to monitor children in the school and mothers giving milk than start making a program on monitoring the orcas. This is simply practicalities. That's why when it comes to the identification of the impact, that we can see the impacts on wildlife is equivalent to the impacts on humans. Then when we go into the indicators, we have to think about proxies. And when the monitoring of concentrations of some pollutants in air or in soil or in human milk can be an appropriate proxy to monitor the pollution in the broader environment.
Thank you so much, Anne, for the question, and thank you, Mark and Carlos, for your replies. We could keep, I think, in this line, but unfortunately, I also have the hard task of keeping the time, and would like to go to our final block of question. Actually, one broader question, and that will help us close the loop with the opening remarks at the beginning. When setting global targets, and this is very much the case in the context of the CBD, there is of course the multi-level game that is taking place all the time, and a lot of policy learning and reflection on whether some ambitious targets taken in one part of the world could be replicated, could be used as an inspiration for setting the global level of ambition. Would that make sense? Would that be accepted by other parts of the world? So it opens a whole range of both, I would say, technical and of course more strategic political questions. And so with that being said, I would like to ask you two, Mark and Carlos, if you think that the targets of the EU Zero Pollution Action Plan would be relevant if we would be relevant to promote them at the global level, maybe both on what they're aiming at and in terms of the numerical values that they're proposing. If you think that this could be helpful to have and I would say relevant, fruitful, would it help the global conversation if they were presented, suggested as maybe an example to set or to follow when we will be setting the global targets. I don't know.
Should I come in first? Did you want to?
If
So,
please.
So I think the Zero Pollution Action Plan is a great document. Wading through it the other day. I say wading because there's so much in it. It's a really rich document. At the high level, the goals are really ambitious. It's making clear that to right now have zero pollution is a difficult thing, but that's the ambition. It's saying, but by 2030, let's have real substantive change. In there, as I've said, this goal that you have to reduce nutrient losses by 50% by 2030, I see it as a direct, consistent with the Colombo Declaration we worked on with UNEP and the South Asia countries on to halve nitrogen waste. So yes, really ambitious. If I were to be critical and say, what is the opportunity with a document like that? Because I think it is a good document, but it reads a bit like a committee document that everybody had a shot at getting their message in. And in the end, the European Commission, your big commission, you've got 30 departments and there are 30 plus contributions. So the challenge, I think, in reflection going forward is how to build coherency and look at linkages across the document, but then those linkages more helpfully strengthen your top level goals. The illustration of nitrogen is I run through nitrogen. I see it here and there across the document, but not a common thread. And it may be that Carlos will say the same for toxic chemicals. Somebody else will say for other themes. So I think, yes, the great high level goals are there. The ambition is strong and the opportunity is to work now, reflect and make it more coherent.
Thank you so much, Mark.
I guess it's my time now.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. For the secretariat of my multilateral body, for me, it would be very politically difficult to endorse straightforward not yet a proposal from a member state. So what I would recommend the European Union is to put forward this proposal to the different mechanisms of the conventions. We have the COP coming up. And by a matter of principle, I think it's extremely healthy to have substantive proposals on the table with good data, good, well-researched, well-documented, and this will enrich the global discussion and decision-making. I think this would be, I would encourage the Commission to, and to equal the same to any other party, whenever have hard data and information to put forward and to go global. This is multilateralism, so go for it. Perhaps before you close, I would also like to say that when talking about pollution, we should not just look at the pollution that we cannot see and we cannot smell, the chemicals. We also look at the waste streams. There is, if I can go into my slides, the technician may help. I just want to illustrate you how important are the waste streams around the world. There's also a lot of data on that. Here in the previous one, oh no. Sorry, I got the thing wrong. It would take 2 seconds more. This is solid waste. And the streams of waste around the world. It's supposed that the waste has to be treated as close as possible to the origin of the waste and to be recycled or disposed or whatever. This is what happens. And we have a best example with the plastic waste crisis. And unfortunately, we have these amendments adopted under the Basel Convention just in the last COP, and we are trying to be able to control that. There are data on that also, and what are the transboundary movements of waste. When it comes simply to household waste, there is also a lot of data on that. This is data you can find on household waste, on how much of this is recovered, is recycled, is used to go into the landfills with strong impacts on land use, on land cover, how much goes to incineration with big impacts on climate change as well. So all this also provides for good indicators on the waste that you can smell and touch, not only the waste that you cannot smell and you cannot touch. And as I said, I strongly encourage to the European Union and all the other parties to come forward with all the data they can have available and proposals to the scope to have a good discussion on how to address pollution and hopefully to get to a planet with a zero pollution level.
Thank you so much, Carlos. Thank you both. Thank you to Anne also for the comment and question. And before I give the floor to Florica for some closing remarks, I'd like to propose my own very personal and I would say small wrap up, very short. It's hard to do justice to the wealth of everything that you've shared in such a short time, but I'd like to focus for me, and sorry if I adopt too much of a structuralist vision of the world, but there seems to me to be different levels, to nested levels of where we need to work to indeed connect better the topics and communities and tools and so forth. And there was first one, I would say, overarching level, which I would say is the level of the narrative or of the qualitative definition of ambition, of a fuller ambition. As Anne was saying, we need to have the fuller story. And there seems to be still quite some work to do, actually, to develop this type of more encompassing narrative, bridging the different issues at stake. And then there's a work to do around the communities of work. So the people, whether in civil society, the different non-state actors, but of course, even the communities of negotiators, and even, I would say, the people who are in the staff of the conventions to try and perform this more encompassing and qualitative definition of ambition. There's a lot of policy learning to do between parties, probably. I would say both on each different topic separately, but also on how the different parties are trying to make the issues converge in their own action and implementation. And then there's a range of more, I would say, technical instruments. And so we talked about, we mentioned briefly some things about the different types of targets that we could imagine that could reflect or be used in the different arenas. And there's a question, I would say, on both the numerical level of their ambition, but also on the aim. What are the targets aiming at that could help better bridge the issues and the community and reflect the more integrated vision. And then reflecting this, there's a lot of work to do at the level of the instruments, of the apparatus, I would say the technical infrastructure that we need and especially in the indicators and data to really sustain this joint effort. And this is my own last take. I think that we haven't directly addressed that, but it was, of course, present everywhere. There's a knowledge challenge, and there is probably a lot also of effort to still make, to create more, I would say, interdisciplinary research that is also helping to identify where we need to act to indeed fulfill this more integrated and joint ambition for the different fora. So that being said, this is my attempt of a wrap up of everything that you've said. And so that being said, Florica, the floor is yours for closing remarks. And thank you again so much to everybody.
Thank you. And thank you, first of all, Alexander, for a very brave moderation. And very much also a big thank you to Carlos and Mark, because we were missing one panelist, which was Anna Engelint. And therefore, the two had to come in quite often. But I was very silent because I was listening in, because with my colleagues, we were listening in because we wanted to hear your views and also your expertise and expectations, but also advice on what we have to do. And indeed, Alexander, you already basically put everything together, but let me nevertheless give it a second try, because we are on the way to get ready for the Biodiversity COP, which is at the end of the year in October in Kunming. And we do know that we really want to cooperate with other partners towards an ambitious outcome. Now, when I listened to today's panel, it was very clear that there is probably in the process for the moment a mismatch, because the experts, the real experts, do not feel involved enough. And that can not only be the experts on pollution, but also experts on biodiversity. I think, Alexander, you used the word interdisciplinary approach. That's exactly, I think, what is needed. I think needed these expertise in the preparations, in the negotiations. Why? Because when I listened, I understood that the science-based indicators are already there, not known enough, not factored in enough. Many are basically already agreed, but actually we also want to go beyond. So at least we need to now get the baseline right if you want to go even beyond. And then there was a clear call to mobilize more existing communities. And I think this is also a lessons learned for all of us when we look at the sort of triple crisis that we are in, be it now the climate change, biodiversity loss, or pollution. It's all interacting. But this is something which is only now coming to the forefront, because so far climate change was looked upon not in isolation, but it was the climate action plan, and it was the climate summit. And now the interlinkage between the COP26 and the COP15 becomes much more clearer. And that is, I think, what I also took from what you are saying. Whatever we do, whether we pollute, it leads to, of course, loss of biodiversity, but loss of biodiversity means less natural carbon sinks and so on and so on. So aggravating the climate situation. And I think the interlinkages between chemicals and waste, which was also mentioned, the interlinkages between what is human and environmental health is not explained enough, not necessarily among the experts, but also not in the narrative, so that everybody understands what we do really matters for each and every country. And I think stories we have to tell much more, and we have to also go to explain why the existing level of indicators of science pushes us to go and be even more ambitious. And I think here we take now a pause, we have to reflect more. But it is clear that what I heard, and not only me, all my colleagues who were listening in, and also others, I hope are getting a push to put these communities together, but also to go even more determined ahead, because we really depend on nature for our survival. And the development of healthy ecosystems are really so essential. Again, interlinkages. Is it food security? Is it poverty eradication? SDGs were mentioned. Is it health or climate protection? So clearly, we now have to bring more knowledge together, more expertise together, more communities together, and to act for a very decisive moment now. And this urgency really is clear. I think the COP15 will be a real chance if we get it right. It's potentially not only our biggest chance, it might also be our last chance to really reverse us from getting into a spiral which we cannot reverse, which is then an irreversible crisis. And I think also that is not yet enough known, because experts talk about chemicals, but most of the citizens, the actors, the politicians will not understand that. They need to get that translate into a narrative that they realize, yes, we are at the sort of the brink of the abscess, we have to act. So this is what I take. We need more collaboration, but to go even more determined ahead, perhaps a little bit more imagination. But I think all these are very vital qualities. You have them. We get inspired by that, and this will help us to turn around the situation. So thank you also from my colleagues, also for the ideas on how and what we would have to do from the European side. And that's precisely why we have one big framework, which is the European Green Deal, under which biodiversity, chemical strategy, circular economy, and the Zero Pollution Action Plan are tools and elements. So thank you very much for this very well moderated and very thoughtful and very expert panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
rest.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Well done.